If you have been following Biotech's news, you might have noticed opinion piece placing biotechnology in a dark place right now. They might have a point: falling stock price, pharmaceutical companies being booed, negative sentiment, and even the new revolution with CRISPR-based drugs seems like a bad business. However, I'm here to bring a bit more optimism to you. I will analyze the surrounding context and the long-term outlook for biotech stocks. Welcome to Taxi Biotech, a show to keep up with the latest news and updates from the world of biotechnology and to learn about its impact on the stock market. The stock data I present here is just a reflection of how companies or the clinical trials are progressing and does not constitute any investment recommendation. This is purely for entertainment. Here is today's agenda. First, I will provide an overview of the current socioeconomic state and how it might impact in biotech investments. Then I'll discuss the new policies being introduced by the US Department of Health. And finally, I'll analyze whether it makes sense to invest in the XBI index, which tracks biotech companies, or to follow alternative strategies, the ones I personally use here in Taxi Biotech. Hey, disclaimer, I have no political bias. I live in Spain, Europe. I simply want to understand how politics and economics can influence the biotech sector. So let's go! In this video, I'm responding to Adam, the author of the article Biotech is in a dark place right now, who invite everyone to discussion on the topic. Point 1. The context: high interest rates for biotech. Biotechnology is known for burning cash to fund research, and that money usually comes from debt. So when interest rates are high, like they are right now, it's a huge blow to the funding of small and mid-sized biotech companies without market products. Take a look at this graph. Whether the interest rate starts rising, here with the solid line, biotech stocks tend to correct from their own 2020 bubble and get flat. Since the US biotech dominates the global industry, any changes in US policies have direct effect on the market that we study, US biotechnological companies. So what's happening in the US and also in the global economy? This is the key, the debt bubble that is forming. And look at this chart. Regardless of the administrations, the rise in debt has been exponential. And we have deficit. In no household would we allow ourselves to earn 5 and spend almost 7, but that's exactly what governments do. Except that they count this in trillions of dollars. But how is this perpetual deficit sustained? Through debt that is never repaid. Only the interest is covered. And where are interest rates now? At high levels. Look at the trend. After 2028 crisis, interest rates were at zero for a long period. As rates started rising, something happened and pushing them back to zero again, alongside a massive money printing. Now we find ourselves here at historically high interest rates. Trump has already stated that interest rates must come down. Why? Because if they don't, the debt will explode even further. Right now, the US has to refinance a massive amount of debt left by the former Secretary of State, and they will have to do so at nearly 5%. An insane cost on the mountains of debt they are standing on. So, what's next? This is my personal opinion. Interest rate must come down, and Trump has already declared that this is his goal. He has the power to make it happen. Either the Fed lower rates due to an extraordinary event, or they devaluate the debt by printing more money or adjusting reserves. For this reason, I believe interest rates will decrease from here to here. But it will not be an easy ride. If an extraordinary event occurs, the market will suffer a lot. Lower interest rates mean easier funding for biotech companies once again. Point 2. How are spending cuts being implemented? Mainly through layoffs. I will analyze this using an article from Nature. Every links in the comments below, of course, which here discuss how job cuts and reduction in research grants are lowering federal funding support. The US is also withdrawing from international health-related organizations that require significant financial resources. These changes are already affecting NIH researchers, which plans to cut more than 280,000 scientists and engineers and set fixed research grant just at 15%. One sentence from the article seems to sum up the general sentiments here. There is a possibility of building a long-lasting reform, but it may never materialize with these aggressive layoffs. Next, we have another article illustrating what is happening with the USAID, an agency under scrutiny. The most controversial aspect, the criticism circulating on social media regarding its wasteful spending. For example, after this image, the article states that 6.5 billion has been allocated to the HIV/AIDS program. But seriously, with that amount of funding, why do we still see people using plastic containers and handling medical supplies without gloves? It's obvious that a large portion of this money is lost due to corruption, and corruption needs to be eliminated. There is also a lot of unproductive spending in science, including in Spain, of course, I know. However, the focus seems to be cutting on younger researchers, even though we all know that they are the ones who work hardest in academia. In short, they are cutting down the entire tree when perhaps only the branch should be trimmed so that it can keep flourishing. There are also other articles telling that Trump actually can benefit the technology and biotech industry. They argue that better acquisitions deal, simpler regulations, and a strongly early stage research support could help. For instance, Deloitte has released a report stating that biotech executives have a positive outlook. However, I also include here a Bloomberg article reporting that the meeting between Trump and pharmaceutical CEOs did not go well. Look at this moment in the middle of the negotiations. Let's listen here. Trump welcomes Pfizer CEO and the crowd.
I want to thank him, one of the great people, one of the great businessmen. Thank you, Albert. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Here the crowd boos the company, prompting Trump to expose the situation, making it clear who hold the power in these discussions. Brutal. So, as summary, if basic science funding is cut at this core, it will have a long-term impact. Though in the short term, it might not be as noticeable. Efficiency needs to improve, and there should be a solid plan for that. But what's the current plan? Firing people and stopping new hires? Elon, go after the unproductive ones, not the young researchers who are actually getting the work done. At the end of the day, Trump wants US business to go up, and biotech is too big to let it collapse. However, he has also wants to reduce government costs, and pharmaceutical pricing will be a major battleground. To keep biotech competitive in the US, he will need to offer something in return, which will be positive. At least, that's my perspective. Next, regulatory and political clarity. What do investors dislike the most? Uncertainty. And the appointment of Robert Kennedy Jr. as Secretary of Health and Human Services is adding confusion. Based on what I've listened, Kennedy appears to be against vaccines, pharmaceutical companies, and cancer treatments. But is this really true? Let's take a closer look at his policies. And just to clarify, I am neither for nor against Kennedy. I am simply analyzing the situation to understand its impact on the markets, okay? I have selected two BBC articles, although I have no idea whether they lean left or right, because I live in Spain and I am unfamiliar with this newspaper. However, they seem fairly neutral. So what has Kennedy said about vaccines? Okay, in the US, vaccines have long been linked to outings, but Kennedy Jr. has stated that his own children are vaccinated and that he is not anti-vaccine. He says he only wants to examine the safety data and share it, and that he will not ban vaccines, but wants to ensure people have the right to choose. Well, this right to choose exists in Europe, I think, as well. The real question is how this will be presented to the public, and whether there will be an attempt to influence public perception. In that way, seen from a neutral perspective, his talks about vaccination doesn't seem that extreme. Regarding on food regulation, it appears that Kennedy wants the US to align more closely with European standards, claiming that Europe has banned thousands of ingredients that are still allowed in the US. Again, this seems like a reasonable approach. However, it's true that he has made controversial statements about hydroxychloroquine, raw milk, and vaccines, often relying on low-quality studies, retracted papers, or even single sources. As scientists, we know that just because something is published in a paper doesn't make it absolute truth. You can always find contradictory studies. Arguments require strong evidence from multiple perspectives. My impression is that he finds one study and builds his entire thesis around it, which is not reassuring. On the other hand, he promotes exercise, healthy eating, and sun exposure, all of which are already widely encouraged in Europe and are generally beneficial for everyone. Another controversial topic is fluoride in the water. In the US, fluoride is added to tap water to prevent cavities, whereas in most of Europe we don't put fluoride in water. We simply use toothpaste. Most Europeans would prefer to drink water in its most natural state. And finally, because Kennedy believes that the FDA is a part of a conspiracy, he wants to fire and replace its staff with NIH researchers. I don't believe in conspiracy theory, but at least he is proposing replacements rather than close the agency. Overall, my impression is that Kennedy's roles would be less radical than initially expected, and that his impact on the biotech industry won't be significant. But this is, of course, my personal opinion. And the last one, investing in the XBI index or using alternative strategies. Looking at Adam's articles, he highlights something that is becoming a constant in our society: polarizations. He and others in Twitter expose two different views. The long-term investor seems as the good guy who patiently watches their portfolio growth, and the short-term investors labeled as the bad guy who only manipulates the markets. Well, I completely disagree with this narrative. No one is asked whether they are a long-term or short-term investors before entering the stock market, because the market is open to everyone, and both strategies are valid. A trader operating for weeks or months provides liquidity to the long-term investor, making both complementary to each other. There is nothing wrong with understanding of how the market works and trying to profit from it. That's exactly why taxi biotechs exist. And is the XBI a good indicator of biotech's health? Adam posted this on Twitter. 5 years of nothing. He compares XBI to the S&P 500, showing that after the 2020 biotech bubble here, when we believe biotech could save humanity, the sector corrected, as expected. But then it crashed hard when interest rates started rising in 2022. So is XBI a good measure of biotech performance? Yes or no? This index groups American biotech companies, many of which compete against each other. If several companies are working on the same disease, the first one to succeed wins, causing its stock to rise. However, its competitors' stocks plummet, which result in a neutral or negative index performance. That's because XBI is a purely mechanical index based on thematic relevance, market capitalization, and stock listing location. That's fine, but I prefer a different approach. My strategy is to scientifically evaluate research progress, analyze biotech market behavior in different scenarios, understand the industry, and use that knowledge to make decisions. In my personal opinion, uncertainty in the biotech sector will start to clear up, driven by lower interest rate, making funding easier. But we could live a 2020 crash moment before the lowering rates. A regulatory policy that won't be as harmful as expected. Basic science funding cuts that may affect the long term but not the medium term. And additionally, I strongly defend that short and medium term investors are not bad for the market. They complement long term investors, and everyone who is invested in biotech should be welcome.